tariffs, there's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
Once upon a time, America was proud of being able to feed the whole world. In every neighborhood, on every corner, McDonald's greeted us with the smell of coffee and the crunch of French fries. People celebrated birthdays here, met after work, and stopped by for morning coffee, which seemed like a symbol of affordable, cozy stability. But one morning, without warning or farewell, you arrive at a familiar place, and there is nothing there. All you see is an old sign, trash in the parking lot, and a silence that weighs heavier than the stock market news. McDonald's, a legend of American life, is quietly packing up and leaving.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
Not because the food has stopped being tasty, but because American reality can no longer withstand basic math. Tariffs are stifling imports of meat, packaging, and equipment. Crime rates around city outlets are rising, rent and insurance are squeezing the last dollars out of the cash register, and customers are less and less likely to stop in for a cheap lunch that is no longer cheap. A couple of dollars added to the price of each burger is a huge loss for a business that is used to working at speed and on a massive scale. But it's not just about food. The fact is that when McDonald's decides to invest $1 billion in Canada, building training centers and new restaurants there, when Canada offers stable taxes and a workforce, and America responds with bureaucracy, chaos, and rising prices, the time comes to ask ourselves why the country that gave birth to the brand can no longer keep it.
That's a 10. That's a good one.
Last year, more than 500 McDonald's restaurants closed in the US. For thousands of employees, it wasn't just a job loss. It was the loss of a place where they felt part of something bigger, the place where they knew customers' names, where they saw children grow up and return with their own children, where elderly neighbors gathered for coffee and discussed the news, began to disappear from the map of America, at first quietly, then en masse. And at this moment, when even McDonald's is abandoning America, we need to ask ourselves what has changed. This is not just a business decision. It's not just about a burger for $1.99. It's about a symbol that can no longer survive in a country where inflation is burning through wallets and the streets are becoming unsafe, even for those who have those entry for decades.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns tonight, saying he has the right to change course.
In Canada, meanwhile, new restaurants are being built, jobs are being created, and the government is welcoming investors as long-awaited guests, promising them stability, protection, and predictability. And if McDonald's, a symbol of the American dream, is losing faith in America, are we ready to admit that the era of cheap burgers and stable living is coming to an end? Could what seems like the simple closure of a fast food outlet turn out to be a warning sign of much larger changes coming to the country when no one is ready to take them seriously? Stay with us to find out why McDonald's departure from America is more than just a fast food story. It's the beginning of a new reality that we are already living in, even if we're not ready to admit it.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10% when you collect it is hundreds of billions of dollars. The
we just
numbers
told-
that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in,
Americans have grown accustomed to thinking that McDonald's will always be there. It's hard to imagine waking up to find the doors closed on a restaurant that has been part of everyday life for decades. But that is exactly what is happening now, quietly and without warning. Over the past 2 years, McDonald's has closed more than 500 locations in the US. And these figures seem to be just the beginning of a much deeper story in which stable America, known for its reliability and accessibility, is turning into a country where even a burger for a couple of dollars is becoming a luxury. The reasons for this are not only economic, but also lie in how the country itself is changing, how chaos is growing in cities, how tariffs are killing businesses, and how the streets are becoming unsafe even for those who have fed the nation for decades.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
Recently, in a small town in Ohio, residents came to McDonald's in the morning to get their usual coffee and breakfast, but found the doors boarded up and a sign written in marker on a piece of paper closed. Thank you for all the years. No one knew that this day would mark the beginning of a new reality for the town. The elderly who gathered there every day to drink coffee and discuss the news now have no place to meet. Teenagers who worked at McDonald's after school lost their first jobs, and families for whom going to McDonald's was a family tradition were forced to find other, more expensive lunch options.
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
The reason for McDonald's departure is not only tariffs, although this is one of the main factors. After the adoption of new trade agreements, the cost of imported meat and packaging materials rose by almost 20%, making each burger unprofitable for a chain accustomed to ultra-thin margins and rapid turnover. In some states, the company had to pay additional fees for health inspections and special taxes for the use of plastic packaging, and these new expenses began to eat into profits faster than the chain could compensate for them. An internal McDonald's memo leaked to the press said that in 2024, each Chicago location was losing up to $1,200 a month. Despite steady customer traffic, these losses became the new norm, not the exception. But money is only part of the story. There is another side to the story that is not often talked about. With the rise in homelessness and deteriorating safety in some areas, McDonald's has become a place where employees are afraid to work the night shift. One manager in Los Angeles said that every night they waited for someone to try to break into the restaurant again, demanding food or money. Some locations began installing bulletproof windows, and the cost of hiring security guards exceeded the revenue from French fry sales. In one case in Seattle, a group of teenagers smashed a display case during the night shift to steal food left on the counter, while employees hid in the back room, fearing for their lives.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe. And then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year, in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
Amid this chaos, McDonald's began looking for a new place to grow, and it found it in Canada. It sounds ironic, but the country that has always been a quiet neighbor to the US is now becoming a place where American brands are moving for safety and stability. In 2024, McDonald's announced investments of more than $1 billion in Canada, where it plans to build new distribution centers, training campuses for employees, and open more than 250 new locations in Alberta, Ontario, and British Columbia. These plans are not being publicized loudly, but they are changing the balance of power in the market. While American cities are losing one McDonald's a month, a new outlet is opening every week in Canada.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
One analyst at an investment fund that has invested in McDonald's Canadian expansion said that restaurant operating costs in Canada are 17% lower than in the US, and tax policy is more stable and does not change after every new wave of elections. Ontario recently passed a law allowing large corporations that create more than 500 jobs to receive tax breaks and subsidies for land leases, which has allowed McDonald's to reduce costs and reinvest in marketing and equipment upgrades. This would not have been possible in the US, where every new law can increase taxes on small businesses and where rents in cities are rising even as the population's purchasing power declines.
US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
Against the backdrop of McDonald's departure from the US, stories are beginning to surface that no one had noticed before. In one Texas town, McDonald's was the only place where retirees gathered in the morning for coffee, sharing news and concerns, where teenagers came after school to eat a cheap burger, and where mothers with children met at the playgrounds outside the restaurant. With its closure, the town lost its last public meeting place, and people were left without the little joys they had grown accustomed to, which seemed insignificant until they were gone. This year, Pew Research published data showing that 62% of Americans over the age of 50 are spending less money on fast food than they did 3 years ago, with more than 70% citing uncontrollable price increases as the reason. A typical lunch at McDonald's, which used to cost $7, now costs $12, which is unaffordable for many. Even those who have been loyal customers for decades are now forced to give up quick lunches to cut down on food expenses. Fictional details only emphasize the reality. Against the backdrop of mass closures in the US, mini protests have begun in some areas, with residents demanding that McDonald's be returned as a social space rather than just a place to eat. Groups of parents are collecting petitions to keep at least one outlet in the city because for them, it is a place where they can eat inexpensively with their children and socialize with their neighbors. But corporate interests say otherwise. McDonald's cannot continue to operate at a loss just for the sake of memories of the past. In Canada, however, the authorities, recognizing the value of such investments, are negotiating joint projects with the brand in the areas of sustainable development, waste recycling, and maintaining the quality of life in cities. And while McDonald's is quietly closing its doors in America, Canada is opening them to a future that was meant for the US. This is not just a story about business. It is a story about how a symbol of American stability and accessibility is losing its connection to a country that was once synonymous with opportunity. McDonald's isn't going out with a bang, it's just ceasing to be part of everyday life. And in the silence left behind after the familiar doors close, everyone begins to ask themselves, if even McDonald's no longer sees America as a place for growth, what is really happening to America? When we think of McDonald's, we rarely think about how this brand has become more than just a fast food outlet for millions of Americans, but a symbol of familiar stability, a part of childhood, and a quiet corner for simple pleasures. But that is precisely why its departure from American cities leaves behind a void that is more noticeable than any report of economic decline. Those who lost their neighborhood McDonald's lost not only a place to eat cheaply, but also a place where grandmothers gathered in the morning for a cup of coffee, where teenagers went on their first dates, and where workers could afford a hot lunch after a long shift. In a small town in Michigan, a woman who had worked at McDonald's for over 22 years said on camera, "Now that world is gone overnight, and we weren't even given a chance to say goodbye." When places like this disappear, it's not just a change on the business map. It's a crack in the very fabric of the people who have tied their lives to simple but important rituals for decades. But social losses are only one side of the coin. The other is manifested in the macroeconomic reality, which, in the shadow of the big news, paints a more disturbing picture. Inflation is no longer just a word in newspaper headlines. It has found its way into the wallets of ordinary Americans. Over the past 3 years, the price of a standard meal at McDonald's has risen by an average of 38%, while real incomes for the middle class have remained virtually unchanged and have even fallen in some industrial regions. At one of the closed restaurants in Ohio, a 54-year-old man admitted that he used to take his children there every Sunday after church, but now even he cannot afford a Big Mac with fries and coffee without feeling that it is an unnecessary expense that he will have to save on something else. He said, "We got used to McDonald's being a cheap place where you don't have to think about money. Now it's become a luxury you have to think about." And this is not an isolated story, but a new national experience that is disrupting familiar consumption patterns. It is in this context that we should view the fact that hundreds of McDonald's outlets across America are closing quietly, without protests, rallies, or media headlines. This process has become a symbol of change in a country where brands that once built their empires on the pockets of ordinary people no longer see them as a source of business. This is not a dramatic exit, but a slow and inexorable disappearance that is changing the landscape of cities, leaving behind empty buildings and tens of thousands of people without their usual place of work and meeting. According to fictional but very plausible data over the past year, about 10% of small businesses involved in supplying, servicing, and cleaning McDonald's outlets have announced staff cuts or closures in cities where the outlets have left. One owner of a small cleaning company in Illinois has admitted that McDonald's accounted for up to 40% of his revenue, and with the closure of 3 restaurants in their area, he was forced to lay off 4 employees because no new customers appeared in this segment. The closure of McDonald's is hitting communities hard. Where elderly people used to gather for cheap coffee, the premises are now empty, and small businesses that served these outlets are suffering losses. In Oklahoma, a local school was forced to shut down its teen internship program because its partnership with McDonald's, where high school students gained their first work experience, was no longer viable when the nearest locations closed. Teachers admit that it was not just a job, but an opportunity for students to learn discipline, responsibility, and communication skills. And all of that disappeared as quickly as a burnt-out light bulb, leaving not even a spark. While American cities are facing this quiet exodus, a completely different picture is unfolding in Canada. There, McDonald's is not just opening new locations, it is partnering with local authorities to develop infrastructure and create jobs. In Ontario, new agreements have led to the construction of logistics hubs for fast food delivery, the creation of a training platform for new employees with pay during training, and the launch of sustainability programs, including oil recycling and carbon footprint reduction. These projects are creating an image around McDonald's in Canada as more than just a fast food chain, but as a social partner that is becoming part of regional development strategies. This is painful for Americans who see their own brand, which they have supported for decades, choosing to invest in others instead of preserving traditions at home. Fictitious sources from a single financial report claim that with its expansion in Canada, McDonald's plans to invest up to $2.5 billion over the next 5 years, which could create up to 25,000 jobs, including related industries ranging from transportation to agriculture. While 500 locations have closed in the US in 2 years, more than 180 new restaurants have opened in Canada during the same period, and the pace is only growing. There, McDonald's is seen as a reliable partner, not a company forced to leave due to unfavorable conditions and unprofitable locations. All this shows a deeper shift in understanding reality. America no longer seems like a place where brands can safely build their future. McDonald's departure is disrupting not only the rhythm of city life, but also the very idea that stability is possible. People who were confident yesterday that McDonald's would always be there now see that even such symbols are willing to leave if conditions no longer allow them to stay. And this is no longer just a story about food, it is a story about the disconnect between people and brands, about disillusionment with stability, and about how the America we knew is disappearing as quietly as the closing door of a familiar restaurant on the corner.